Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling something called the wealth effect. We're going to break down how a soaring stock market and a red-hot housing market actually affect our spending habits in really different ways. Because it turns out, not all wealth is created equal when it comes to us opening up our wallets.
So, let's just start with the big question, right? When the markets are booming, do we all start spending more? I mean, you'd think the answer is a pretty simple yes, but the reality is way more complex than you might think.
And to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to understand that not all wealth is the same. There's a huge difference between the kind of wealth you own on paper and the kind you own in the, physical world.
And that gets us to the core idea for today, the wealth effect. At its heart, it's a simple theory. When your net worth goes up, you just feel more comfortable spending money, and that gives the economy a nice little boost. But, and this is a big but, how much you spend depends entirely on how you got wealthier in the first place.
Okay, this table right here is absolutely key to understanding everything we're going to talk about. So over on the left, you've got financial assets, like stocks. These are basically intangible. They're just digital promises of some future value. And critically, they're super liquid. You can sell them and have cash in your account like tomorrow. But then on the right, you've got real assets, like your house. It's physical. You can touch it, but it's very illiquid. I mean, you can't just sell a bedroom when you need some quick cash, right? This one difference changes everything.
So, how does this all play out in the real world? Well, first up, let's look at the stock market, where its effect on our spending is mostly a psychological game.
Okay, so the basic idea here is pretty intuitive, right? You log into your brokerage account, you see all that green, the numbers are climbing, and you feel more financially secure. And maybe, just maybe, that feeling translates into buying a slightly nicer dinner or that new gadget you've been eyeing. It's a real effect, for sure, but it's often a pretty small one.
But here's where it gets really interesting. It's all about how our brains are wired. The feeling of gaining money and the feeling of losing it, well, they are not equal and opposite reactions, not even close.
And this brings us to this huge concept in behavioral economics called loss aversion. As this research points out, our brains are just hardwired to feel the sting of a loss way more intensely than we feel the joy of an equivalent gain. That fear, it has a powerful grip on how we behave with our money.
And wow, this chart just lays it all out for us. Look at the one on the left. That shows how our spending reacts when the market goes up. See? It's a pretty small, temporary little bump. But now, look at the chart on the right. This is what happens when the market goes down. The drop in spending is so much sharper, it's deeper, and it lasts longer. We basically slam on the spending brakes when we're scared of losing money, way harder than we ever hit the gas when we're gaining it.
Okay, so that's the psychological roller coaster of the stock market. But when we switch gears and talk about housing, the story completely changes. It's way less about feelings and psychology and much more about simple financial mechanics. It's not just about feeling richer, it's about actually getting your hands on cash.
And the key concept here is something economists call the collateral channel. Basically, your house isn't just a place you live. It's a giant asset that a bank will let you borrow money against. So as its value goes up, so does your power to take out loans.
Yeah, you can literally think of your house turning into an ATM. So step 1, your home's value shoots up. Step 2, this increases your equity, which is your borrowing power. Step 3, you can then pull that equity out with something like a home equity loan, turning that on-paper wealth into cold, hard cash. And that cash, well, you can spend that on anything. It's a much more direct pipeline to spending than that gentle psychological nudge from the stock market.
So we've got these two very different things happening, right? Psychology for stocks and collateral for houses. But there's another really crucial layer to this whole story. Who is actually getting wealthier? Because it turns out that makes a massive difference for the economy.
So to understand this, we need to talk about something called the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. I know it's a fancy-sounding term, but it's for a super simple idea. If I give you an extra $1, how much of it are you going to spend and how much are you going to save?
And here's the thing. MPC is not the same for everyone. Not at all. For someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, an extra $1 is probably getting spent, like, immediately on things they need. But for someone who's already pretty wealthy, that same dollar is much more likely to just get saved or invested. And this means the boost to the economy from new wealth really depends on whose pockets it lands in.
And look, this isn't just a theory. The research backs it up. This study from Carroll and Slakalek shows that economic stimulus is way more powerful, like 2 to 3 times more effective, when it gets to the people with a high MPC. Putting money into the hands of those who are most likely to spend it creates a much bigger ripple effect across the whole economy.
All right, this brings us to our last section, and honestly, a pretty surprising twist in the whole story. We tend to think of the 2000s housing boom and bust as the ultimate example of the wealth effect, but some new research says we might need to rethink that whole thing.
You know the popular story, right? House prices went to the moon, people felt rich, they pulled equity out of their homes and spent like there was no tomorrow. Then, of course, prices crashed, that wealth just vanished, spending collapsed, and it helped trigger the Great Recession. It seems like a perfect, if, tragic example of the wealth effect.
But here's the twist. A really detailed study from 2018 by Gurin and his colleagues comes right out and challenges that story. By using a much more precise way of measuring the housing wealth effect, they found that, actually, it was surprisingly stable and wasn't particularly large during that boom period at all.
So what's going on here? How could that be? Well, the answer is that there were these really powerful forces pushing in opposite directions. So on one side, sure, you had homeowners gaining equity and borrowing power. But on the other side, you had this growing number of people who were underwater, meaning they owed more on their mortgage than their house was even worth. For that group, it didn't matter if house prices went up or down a little, they couldn't borrow anything anyway. So this huge financially frozen group basically acted as a counterweight, and it kept the overall wealth effect surprisingly stable.
So, I guess the big takeaway here is that the wealth effect isn't some simple on-off switch for the economy. Its real impact depends on everything, whether it's stocks or houses, who actually holds that wealth, and what their personal financial situation looks like, how much debt they have. Which leaves us with a final, really crucial question. If the real-world impact of wealth is this messy and this complicated, how can we ever hope to build policies that create a truly stable economy for everyone?